I wanted to ask you a little bit about your creative process.
What really concerns me, I have to admit, first of all, is the aesthetic effect. Make sure you know what your own sensibility, what your own tastes are. Don't let editors try to make you sound like everybody else.
Yes. Yes.
This is the disease, especially in journalism, modern journalism, and in America it's worse than anywhere else because there are a lot of editors who use the Chicago Manual of Style as their catechism.
Something to the effect of don't perform or make music for those in the audience, as it were. To primarily write or produce music or one's creative endeavor, first and foremost being for oneself.
It sounds like a sort of egoism or even selfish advice, but it's not. Because if you allow there to be any sort of estrangement between your natural critical faculties and the creative impulse, if you feel you have to obey a canon of rules that nonetheless does not agree with your own sensibility, you'll end up producing something not only worse in your own perspective, but in general, your readers won't like it as much. It turns out that it's very hard to write well, to compose music well, to do anything well without first and foremost pleasing yourself and letting yourself become absorbed in the act of writing or painting or composing. Because if it can draw you in, if the creative act can also be an act of delectation or appreciation, then you generally know you're writing well. Trust your own temperament, and even if it's very far outside the mainstream.
If the actor loves what he's doing or she's doing, then it becomes very obvious to the audience and they react to it as such.
Yeah. In any art, if there's no element of joy in the creation of it, there's no element of play, even if you're writing a tragedy, that becomes obvious. I mean, the moment it becomes the drudgery of, and even the most talented of writers can end up producing something like the screenplay from a 1970s television program. It's just because if you're just producing for the sake of producing, but if the actual joy of creation there, and even a perverse willingness to force your sensibility on others at times, it gives life to what you're doing. I'd occasionally get an editor who would say, well, wouldn't it be easier for the reader? And always, violently, militantly, I would, I don't give a damn about the reader. That sounds, but it's not. It's actually a much more generous.
A good creative energy somehow comes from something of a liminal space.
I firmly believe it has to. Not in every instance. If you're doing the work you're doing, say a dutiful report about tax law or something. But when you're being creative, no, I believe that you have to think yourself into that state or intuit yourself into that state actually for the work to flow, because I don't believe any sort of creativity is purely the achievement of the self by itself. I do believe in inspiration. I believe that there's a kind of communion with a reality that the imagination opens onto beyond the boundaries of the self. It's the work of someone who's trying to open himself up in a priestly way to allow some other reality to manifest itself through his creativity. He didn't use the word sacrament, but he was clearly thinking in terms of this, or even like a kind of theurgy in which there was something more than at least the small conscious self that he was. It's carrying you along. It's carrying you along. You're not dragging it along. You've been called up into something more than you anticipated being able to do. And I honestly believe that that there are these places where our consciousness opens to greater scope of reality. And so at one time, for all human beings, this was simply the organic expression of our nature, right? The artistic impulse was like the capacity for dreaming vividly, something that was spontaneous, organic, inescapable, and necessary for us. Now it's something, it's a capacity we have to recover almost willfully. In the late modern world, religions have become rather positivistic systems of propositions and adherences that, and I think it's one of the reasons why fundamentalism is one of the particular psychopathologies of modern religion, is because it's a desperate attempt to recover a sense of the sacred, but in the terms of a kind of highly late modern positivist grammar of proposition, tenet, the way that you might adhere to the Constitution of the U.S. if you're an American. That's not the virtue. That's not the habit of mind, the habit of soul that religio once was, which was rather a capacity to be seized from without by what shows itself in us and beyond us. The way back in for modern persons is, to a very great degree, necessarily an aesthetic discipline. Learning to see with the eye of appreciation, surrender before you begin to encumber it with moral or doctrinal expectations. And it's always fascinated me that in the world of the arts, atheism, you can have an atheist artist, but you can't have really, I mean, using atheists in the fullest sense, you can have an artist who has no sense of the transcendent as a real possibility in his own life or her own life, and yet you can't have an art from which the transcendent is absent and that doesn't invite one to turn towards transcendence.
You have these really powerful sort of turns of phrases throughout. One which comes to mind, and I've in my notes right now, is materialist savages, right? So this is sort of turning the thing on its head, right? Turning the tables around.